Good morning, my friends. Today, it's a very sunny day, not a cloud in the sky. It's obvious today it's very cold outside. I don't even have to go outside to tell. I also looked at the weather. Last night it was like -9, so it was pretty damn cold. And today it probably looks like it's a little bit colder even, but I'm not sure exactly. So today I want to talk about why I stopped being an atheist for the most part. For most of my life, I was probably, atheist, agnostic, leaning between those two things. I actually never really was an atheist. Um, so the concept of believing in an esoteric world, metaphysical plane of existence, or believing in God, and so to speak, was something that never really interested me, or I never really thought that there was any substantial proof of its existence, right? So this probably happened when I was around 12, 13, sort of solidified more when I was like 16, 17. And it solidified when I was 16, but then it started changing a little bit as I got older, and started appreciating more spiritual things. I actually went through a phase where I, became very depressed at my own mortality, whatever. And I got like really bad depersonalization, derealization for a period in my life when I was around 16. Around 3 months, it was like, you know, if you've ever experienced derealization, depersonalization, any of those things, I had both kind of at the same time. It's like you're stepping out of your own perspective and you're sort of watching things from a third person point of view. It's like watching your life go by as like a movie, and you're not interacting with it. You're not in charge of it, and it's a freaky feeling. It's definitely very scary. And this sort of happened when I was thinking a lot about my mortality, thinking how fast my life is going by, and that eventually I'll be dead. When you're a kid, life seems to go by so slowly. It's like 1 year is almost like an eternity, almost. And then once I started hitting 16, that like window time became very, very short, which was like a weird feeling for me. And that was kind of when I started questioning a lot of my own beliefs and whatnot. So eventually, the only thing that sort of helped me sort of move forward was actually sort of doing stuff with my life. Getting outside more, exercising was a huge help. But I'd always, even after that, I've always been more agnostic than atheist. I was never really like a full on like believer in something. I was just sort of like saying like, oh, it's possible this exists, etc. I was never really like fairly certain, and we're never really certain about anything, really, or at least I'm not. But I never really was confident in my own beliefs, if that makes sense, until it was around a couple of years ago. I started getting into like internal alchemy, Taoism, all that kind of weird stuff that people sort of think it's if you practice it, you're like a schizophrenic or you're delusional, which is fine to say. People who think that way, I don't necessarily blame them or think they're sheeple or anything like that. It's just that they're we live in a world where those kinds of things are sort of looked down upon as understanding. And I find it quite ironic that people mostly gravitate more towards Western astrology rather than anything that has to do with internal alchemy or using energy with your hands or any of that kind of stuff, which to me just kind of doesn't make sense. To me, it's easier to believe in the energy aspect more so than Western astrology. Western astrology is very mystical and fantastical and everything is determined by the stars in the sky, but more people seem to gravitate towards that than anything else, which I find a little bit odd. I still regard Western astrology to be relevant in certain degrees, but obviously there's a lot of complex things about it. But what really started me to get into it was I was like having like a really down period in my life. I was like, it was a couple years ago. I was very depressed. I was not really feeling like I was going anywhere with my life. Um, I dropped a lot of weight. I was very skinny. I'm already pretty thin, but at that point I was like even a lot skinnier. And it was just not a good time for me mentally, spiritually, physically. It was just not a healthy time for me. It definitely did not feel good most of the time. I was definitely very depressed and anxious. Had a lot of problems with relationships, specifically with women, and having problems both with myself and connecting with them and being able to understand concepts with women and just relationships in general, and not being able to realize that it's not um, like I definitely felt like I needed to have a girlfriend or something in order to be happy, which was a toxic mentality to have, to find happiness in another person. And then a friend of mine recommended that I channel energy into my hands. That is literally what he said, and I was like laughing at him, like, "What are you nuts? Like that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard." And I've had that same attitude before when I was 16 and I was going through that derealization thing where I was like, "Oh yeah, just exercise more. It'll help you." And I'm thinking like, "Oh, I'm like questioning the existence of the universe and of my life, and you think that exercising is gonna solve all that, and you got to be nuts." And I had that same attitude with this about channeling energy into your hands. So anyway, I was like, all right, this is bullshit. But at that point, I was like, fuck it, I'll do anything. And I asked him how he does it. And so this is like how I started. And if you're interested, you can also start it as well. It's something that's definitely very healthy for you. It's definitely made me feel a lot better in a lot of different ways, and just has made me uh, more spiritually conscious and more uh, sort of present, I guess, or just not as pissed off, I guess, or not as anxious or not as depressed. I just feel more comfortable, right? It's like it's basic tool, but you can become a lot more powerful. I definitely don't get as sick as often as I used to. Haven't gotten sick since May of last year. So a year and a half was the last time I was sick. And actually at that point I got really drunk and I was sort of like uh, basically telling God to go fuck himself. That was like a thing that I was like processing in my mind. I had like this huge ego rush. I was just thinking like, yeah, I'm the shit. I don't need religion. I don't need God. Anyways, it was stupid. And then the next day I got sick, and then I got like this horrible, like whatever, just all this shit that's going on, right? So anyway, so this is how I started the energy process. I lied down on my bed. I focused on my hands, just laid there, closed my eyes, and just like tried to imagine it flowing into me. It took about like 5-10 minutes for it to actually happen. Nothing was happening during that time. And then I started feeling like the tingling in the center of my palms. And I was like, whoa, this is cool. And I kept doing that. And I kept focusing. And there was another part of like, just like after a while, you like focus it so much. And then it builds. And then it becomes like almost like you feel like a vibration on your hands, so to speak. And it was intense. It was like, whoa, like this is crazy. I'm like feeling this. My hands got really hot. And then part of it was like, all right, now focus that energy and put it into your heart, right? All that chakra bullshit that I thought was garbage before. And I was like, all right, I'll do that. And it's like a real, like crazy sense of euphoria throughout your whole body. It's like you just feel yourself become fully energized. to your core, really. And it's just like it's an undescribable feeling. It's like having sex for the first time, really. Like it's a different kind of feeling, obviously, but it feels really good, and it doesn't feel like it's draining in any way. It's like something that like you'd feel when you get drunk or something. It's like it's a very positive feeling, and I felt like instantly better. And that was like the first thing that started, and it actually kind of frightened me at first, because when I started doing it after a couple days, I like couldn't stop the feeling. Like I would go out to my normal routine, meet my parents, meet friends, and I would still be feeling that weird tingling vibration in my palms, and it just wouldn't turn off. It would just be there constantly throughout the day, and it kind of freaked me out. It was like moving a muscle that I've never moved before, or like as if I like grew another limb or something. It felt very bizarre to me. It was actually kind of frightening, and I felt like this is like a whole new era into my life of understanding this. And that was sort of like just like in my mind, I'm like, okay, well, this is it. Like even if I am schizophrenic for doing this makes me feel so much better and so much more comfortable with myself, and being able to deal with depression and anxiety so much more effective than anything I've had before. I've been on SSRIs, I've been to therapists, I've been on other medication. None of it's worked really, like at all, like zero. So it works for some people, but it didn't work for me. And when I started doing this, channeling energy in my palms, that was like the biggest turning point, I'd say. One of the biggest turning points, at least, into my life of what changed. And that was also when I started, changing my perspective on God and the universe as well. It sort of solidified my belief more so into understanding these things. And it's like, and then eventually I started getting more into law of attraction, and I started getting more into creating abundance, and then creating, happiness, whatever. And like, it's very interesting. So that was my experience, and maybe you can do it yourself too. So anyway, that's all I have to really say about it, and I hope you have a wonderful day.